Beautiful. Thank you. Thank you, Mary Jean. Welcome to all of you who have taken time out of your busy lives to join us. It's incredible to see who has come and what guest and what topic is bringing people together. Really, really grateful for your presence. I am speaking to you from the Haldeman Tract. This is land that was promised to the Six Nations of the Grand River. It's the traditional homelands of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Neutral peoples. And I invite you, wherever you live, if you know what the traditional territory is or the earth keepers on that territory, please enter that into chat. And that way we have a kind of welcoming and grounding at the same time that we try to move towards a more just and reconciled society. This is part of the work that those of us in Canada are trying to do in a very deliberate, intentional way. And where I know there are people here from all over, but the land acknowledgement is a really important part of our practice and our tradition. And if you know where you are, please enter it and welcome. This is the life writing webinar. Life writing is an integrative work that brings together memory and experience. Spiritual life writing. Oh, I don't want that. It has to disappear. Thank you. Spiritual life writing invites the whole self in. Memory and experience, fact, feeling, imagination, the profane, and the sacred. We offer these life writing sessions to help you find your authentic voice and to shed whatever tears make you hold your tongue. And I am Susan, the monthly instigator, the person who holds the space for life writing, the person who believes that spiritual life writing is a really critical practice. And it's something that we're all invited to in whatever form, however it presents itself and wherever it takes us. That's why I'm really grateful that you're here and we can do these kind of collective learnings and collective voicing and collective support. So tonight we're here to talk about grieving reimagined. And it's a topic that I wouldn't have just picked out of thin air. This is tied directly to my guest tonight, Tamara Jong, whom you'll meet in a moment. And so tonight we bring together grieving and the possibility of joy and visual storytelling. So it's an interesting and maybe an unlikely combination of things that makes it possibly easier even to move into the space. We can talk about grief, because grief in our culture is not a popular topic and it's a hard place for people to go. And I feel like finding other ways in really allows us to come to terms with this most human of experiences, but to move through it in a way that allows us to kind of open up and perceive things differently. Tamara has a beautiful way of framing this, and she said there were things my parents couldn't give me in life, but did in death. And that was the sort of starting point for where we're headed tonight. So Tamara Jong was born in Montreal, and she's a writer and artist of Chinese and Scottish ancestry. She writes about grief, loss, family, belonging, faith, and her life as a Jehovah's Witness. You can find Tamara's work in literary magazines, such as Anomaly, Room Magazine, The Fiddlehead, and in the anthology I edited, Body and Soul. She lives and works on Treaty 3 territory. That's the occupied and ancestral lands of the Haudenosaunee, Anishinaabe, and Adirondack and Mississaugas of the First Nation. And Tamara will correct my pronunciation when she is ready to speak. Okay, if you can highlight Tamara for me, that would be fantastic. And we'll have a chance to talk. Okay, there you are. Thank you. Beautiful. There you are, my friend. Love it. All right, Tamara, can you correct my pronunciation? I'm used to the territorial acknowledgement where I live. You're not that far from where I live, but you're in a different territory. So if you would like to, I would invite you to do that.
No, I think it was like, it was fine.
It was adequate. Okay.
Yeah.
It was adequate. Okay.
I even wonder sometimes if I'm pronouncing
very
it correctly.
forgiving, very forgiving. Right. We're working at this. This is what it looks like, folks, in real life. This is actually Canadians struggling to understand and get this right, which is good. It's good for us to do this. And it's good for us to do it publicly because it gives everybody permission to go, yeah, this is work and this is what we're doing.
No, exactly. Exactly. I agree.
So I'm really happy and grateful that you're here tonight. And I feel like you and I have an interesting connection that goes back a few years now. And yeah, talking about, I think, coming from religious backgrounds where there's been a really strong sense of formation and identity, and maybe living in a world like that that isn't so well understood by people outside that world. And for you, that world was growing up as a Jehovah's Witness, which people have very strong opinions about, or very strong impressions of what that means. Do you want to say a little bit about your background and your family, and just talk to us a bit about that so we understand?
Sure, of course. So I grew up in Laval, Quebec, and my parents, my dad was Chinese, and my mom's from Nova Scotia with original roots in Scotland. And I also, yeah, so being in Quebec, so I considered myself a Quebecer. You know, I love the Habs, but I also grew up as a Jehovah's Witness for many years, so most of my life, probably about 30 plus years, give or take some that I kind of, you know, as a young person, exited for a few years to kind of do my own thing when my parents were distracted. But I ended up coming back because I think I needed grounding and I needed community because at home, you know, my mom had been an alcoholic. My parents did not get along. There was a lot of like trauma there. And I think I needed belonging in some ways, also because of being from a mixed background. There wasn't a lot of kids like us. And also being in Quebec, I was pretty much an Anglophone, you know, English speaking in a French, you know, speaking area. I wanted to learn the language. I struggled with it and I was in English schooling. So somehow I got attracted back to the Jehovah's Witnesses. So I was studying with them. And I feel like this helped me kind of find my way for quite a while and gave me stability and structure in a way that I needed, to be honest. My brother actually left for longer than me and he struggled, you know, with addictions and things like that. So it was something he eventually came back to as well. But I think we just needed that kind of grounding. And we needed, when my parents got, you know, divorced, we needed kind of that dad figure. And I think, and God kind of served that purpose for a very long time. And it was just this constant. So that's what I had. I was a big reader. I did write, but I wasn't totally, I guess, as involved as I would have liked. I think because I was very distracted by my life as a devout witness. And I eventually got baptized at 17, but I had already committed myself many years before, you know, and it was something I was always going to go back to. And so that's what I did. And even as being an artist, I actually was an artist too, but it was like I forgot that life. So because my focus had shifted and I was just more into, you know, kind of what did God want for me? What did I want to do for God? And so I just didn't really think about my own ambitions. And that's kind of like, so when I eventually did leave, then it was a kind of whole trying to find out who was I anyways, you know, was I a writer? I didn't even remember the artist part, but I was like, I don't know. I was in this bubble for a long time. So I was like, who am I? What do I actually believe? You know, and where do I find those belief systems and how can I find more community? I didn't even know. I didn't even know where to start.
And
And
writing
so,
writing was a part of your journey of finding community. Would you say
yeah,
that?
it definitely was. So through therapy, I actually ended up seeing a Jungian therapist who I was kind of like terrified of seeing. I was recommended. So in the middle of my session, my psychiatrist, I think she was a psychiatrist session, she got up in the middle, went to her phone, and started leaving a message for some random person, I thought. And I was like, wow, I must have really messed this session up. What is happening right now?
I
That
bored
someone gets up.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah. That someone gets up in the middle of your session. She's like, hold on. She didn't really tell me what she's going to do. She's like, hold on, I have to make a call.
Uh-huh.
So I was like, okay. So she went and made this call and I couldn't really hear her. And then she said, well, I had to call because of what you were talking about. I'd shared some like writing because I had started writing a little bit again, not very great writing, but it was still writing nonetheless. I'll take it.
Yeah.
And she said, yeah, I think there's somebody that you would actually work with really well. And it was a Jungian therapist. I'm like, Jungian therapist? I was Carl Jung. I was like, oh, philosophy of man. So I was a little worried about that because I was encouraged not to go that way. So, and then that was probably the best thing that could have been done for me because she was also a educator and a writer.
Okay.
and we really connected. So at first I was like, can I still see the psychiatrist for a while, just in case this other thing doesn't work out? I really do like fallback plans. I don't know about any of you, but I'm a fallback plan person. I'm like, is there something just in case that I'm going to keep on the side in case this thing doesn't work out? Like I like to have a little bit of tiny plan.
Yeah.
I can be spontaneous, but I like this tiny plan just in
Yeah.
case,
Yeah.
especially something like that, right? And so I was like, I'll have you until I feel comfortable with this person. Because I was thinking I'd probably drop it. I didn't think it would help me. I thought it probably won't be what I'm looking for. But in fact, it turned out to be exactly what I was looking for. And so
Exactly.
then she encouraged me with writing. And so we would like share writing and she would share books with me, like physical books, and like lend them to me. And that's a big thing when somebody shares a
Yeah.
book with you, right? You
Yeah.
don't share, I don't know about you all, but I don't share them with everyone.
Exactly.
Like,
Yeah.
because if you want it back, you have to have a person that has it, that's trustworthy, that will return it, or at least, even if they don't return it, that they'll love it like you do.
Yeah.
And I'm fine with that. Like, you can keep my books, but I want you to love it like I do.
That's right.
So give it that care. So then that's how I started getting back into writing, and she really encouraged me. And then I eventually took courses. So I went to U of G with Zoe Whittle, and a little tiny nonfiction piece I wrote that wasn't really fantastic. It was okay, but it was just something I wasn't really interested in pursuing. I
Mhm.
wasn't interested in pursuing nonfiction because I was really terrified to kind of write about that life, and I didn't even want to talk about it in some therapy sessions.
Yeah.
I was like, I can't really talk about it. It's not something I want to talk about it because I was worried about bringing shame. But what happened is I yelled at Sabari and nonfiction. I thought I'd try on nonfiction just for fun. And she was at U of T. I was like, I'll try it. Maybe I'll like it. Maybe I won't. And that was it for me. So she kind of gave me the courage. And see, it's so mentors and community is what was able to bring my stories to the fore. Otherwise, honestly, I don't think I would have been able to go this way or even pursue writing. I think if I had continued in fiction, it may have worked out. I mean, the fiction was okay, but it was veiled autobiographical stuff.
Right. Okay.
And in the end, didn't feel real to me. So I had to switch.
So when you say U of G, you're referring to University of Guelph. That's where you worked with Zoe Whittle. And
Yes,
U of T is University of Toronto. That's the continuing studies, right? Where you worked with
correct.
Ayelet Sabari. Okay. And then you and a writing group, right? You've been part of a writing group
Correct.
for a very long time that came out of that class working with Ayelet, right? So it's a real
Yes,
strong bond and working together over time, all
right,
of you plumbing these really profound experiences that you've each had and sort of working on the craft together and developing together. Okay.
right. Yeah, and trusting each other, right? Or finding
Trusting. Yeah.
trustworthy, like people who can receive your work, even if they weren't religious.
Right.
That
Exactly.
meant a lot, like having that. I think that was big for me because, and for many years, because of the way that I was brought up, I didn't really think my voice mattered. I didn't really think of it consciously, but I realized I've been quiet for so long and I had something to say now, but I was really worried about the effect of my words, and then the weight of that kind of weighed on me, when I was writing things down. So I think that, and also the worry about the shame. And I had always planned to go back. That was my thing. I was taking a temporary break because I had been depressed. So when I stopped going to the meetings and
Okay.
eventually stopped going and studying altogether, it was just a temporary thing. So it wasn't meant to be permanent.
This is what
And
you
that's
told
the thing.
yourself. Right. That's what you told yourself for a long time.
Right. So I was like, I'm going to go back. And so this is a temporary thing to kind of fix myself. And then I will go back fixed, right? I will be fixed and I will be good to go.
I
Right.
love that. I don't you love those? Now those are the fictions that we tell ourselves, right? These are the
Correct.
fictions that we live by. So you went through this incredible growth in the interim, right? In this period when you ended up not quite going
Right.
back. And then recently then you hit another really sort of profound period of growth connected to the loss of your father. And can you tell us about that story? And that takes us kind of to the place that we want to explore tonight. You
For
want to
sure.
tell us about that? Yeah.
Sure. So grief, yeah, it's a funny thing. So when my mom died, and it was quite quickly, and we weren't really connected, that was like I was 20 years old, young, full of like disinventor, thinking I'm doing the right thing. She had brought me up as a Jehovah's Witness, and I just didn't really mourn her in the same way, I think, with my father because I hadn't had that time. And I only mourned her like years later, so long after it had a long like sitting period. The grief was there, but it wasn't really as when somebody just dies. And also when my dad left, it's just when he left, it took me only in writing to realize that I had grieved that too, right? So I had lost my mother, but we saw our dad, but the relationship had been changed. And so over the years, I went through all the things that like teenagers go through, and that you think your parents are gods, then you realize they're not, then you hate them, then you sort of don't mind them, and then you forget about them. And then you come around full circle and you're like, oh my God, they do actually know a lot. They are kind of wise, even if they didn't always make the wisest decisions. You're like, as a parent now or as a person now, you're like, I can see why. Once you start to see your parents as people, or I
Yeah.
guess I came to that place where I forgave them in many ways. I was like, well, now that I knew them, I started to know them for the first time, I think,
Right.
in my life. Once I left the witnesses, I think for me personally, I just really opened my eyes to who they actually were. And so my dad and our relationship was always back and forth because physically we weren't in the same province. I was in Ontario, he was in Quebec. I would go back once I moved at 23. I went back less and less. My life was getting set up here, and my brother and sister were here. So, I was happy with that. We had our own little family.
Mhm.
And so then, as far as my dad went, we went back and forth. I wanted to know where we're from, like who is he? And he was always very secretive person. I didn't even actually know where he lived, to be honest, until this year or last year, sorry. And that's decades of not knowing, although I had seen him and talked to him sometimes. And so I felt like in the last few years, our relationship was probably the best that it had ever been, as far as like as far as it could go, like again in his life, as far as the truths he could tell me about my parents, their life together, and his life, and the things I needed to know from him. He was more forthcoming when he was like ill the last 2 months in the hospital, and I felt like our relationship was in a good place. And so it's weird to have that grief, but also get a lot of questions answered. And then when he passed, I had even more questions answered from his relatives, and I wouldn't have had those things. I think I had been looking for them, but I kind of had hit a brick wall with him that he could of what he could give me, you know. And it's not his fault. It's just he also, whatever relationship he had with his parents. So I could appreciate that, but I also, out of respect, I didn't want to push too hard. I pushed, but I didn't want to push him away because I didn't want to lose him again in the way
Right.
that I'd lost him the first time. And so
Okay.
when
Okay.
that's at risk, you kind of weigh out your options.
Yeah.
And for me, I wasn't willing to lose him in that sense. So I was like, I'll ask the questions. If he
Mhm.
doesn't want to tell me, I can't, there's nothing I can do.
Right.
Right.
I'm not going to press him.
So then,
When he was in the hospital, did you know that that would be terminal, or was that?
no, it was weird. I had this like, and I don't know if it was because of my former faith. I always was like this optimist and this thinking he would be well. For some reason, he's like, you can come back in the summer. We'll all, because my dad had a secret family as well. So that was another
Wait, 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 wait,
complication.
wait, wait. No, let's just slow down for a moment. So your dad had a secret family.
Yes.
Okay, just open that up for us a bit so we
Right.
understand what that
So he had
means.
a second family, and we knew of their existence. We just didn't know any specifics. And I didn't know where they lived. I didn't know what their names were. I didn't even know what sex they were. So, but we had three other siblings. One was a stepbrother, but his wife. But we knew of them. We just didn't know any specifics. And so that all came out around the same time. So in those 2 months, like the more specifics parts of it came out. So they just found out about us, although we always knew of them. They
Oh,
just found out, right? So you can imagine that was a complicated layer when you're all in the hospital together, and we would have run into each other. It's very unlikely that we wouldn't have,
yeah.
because by the time the visiting, they often, so we had to deal with like my dad, and then we had, we would, which I was grateful for because I was happy to have siblings, but we has to also talk and answer questions, and that
Yeah.
made it extra complicated,
Yeah.
in view of all of that. And
So
so,
okay, so just in this pause for a moment, then your dad's in the hospital and you're meeting this other family. They're learning about you for the very first time. They didn't even
right.
know about. So this is the shock to the system. And he would not really be the one then to facilitate all these introductions, I would imagine. Or how did you
Well,
do that? You went to the cafeteria and got a coffee and started to catch up. I mean, yeah, you just have to fill this in. This is quite
sure.
remarkable.
Yeah, of course. So I had him on the phone, and because I said, listen, you have to, because he wasn't feeling well for a while. And I said to him, do I need to come down there? I said, you need to tell your other family that you're really not feeling well, because, like, I think there's something wrong. He's like, I'm going for tests. I'm doing this. They know. He's like, no, I'm okay. He would say, Bubba's okay. Like, I'm okay. I said, but I I think you're not okay, And anyway, he decided to go to the hospital. So so he went to the hospital, and then I called his phone, no answer. And so I called, and the nurse picked up, or he got me in contact with the nurse. And so then she said he was in the hospital. He goes, this is sort of where I am right now. I didn't want to tell my brother because my brother gets really upset at these things. So I told my brother where he was, and I was telling my brother, like, go get intel, because we need somebody on the ground. Like, I don't know who to ask, you know,
Right. Right.
without short of me going there, because I couldn't just leave. And then my brother had come and brought my dad McDonald's. And then I guess my dad had also asked my other brother for McDonald's. And so when he came, he says, "Oh, here's your McDonald's, Dad." My dad could still talk and stuff at this point. And he's
Okay.
like, "Oh, I've already had my McDonald's." And he's like, "You've already had your McDonald's?" He's like, he goes, "From my son." He goes, "I'm your son." He goes, "No, no, my other son." And so, you know, the he's kind of like, the old man's lost it. I don't know. He wasn't sure. And so then I started talking to my dad, and then my dad, I guess he realized he had to tell them somehow. So what happened between then and there, I'm not sure, but I know that I said to him, like, "Can you give me information? Because at one time I'm going to call and the line's going to be dead. I'm not going to know anything. Like, I
That's
don't know how to contact you at all." So I
yeah.
said, "I need your wife's name. Do I have a brother and sister? Like, I need their names. Like, I
Yeah.
need phone numbers." And he's like, "Okay, okay, I will." So then I asked him where he was right now. And then he put my brother on the phone, Mark, not my brother from Ontario, but my brother from
Okay.
Quebec. And he
Okay.
put him on the phone, and I'm like, "Hello." And he's like, "Hello." I said, "This is weird, right?" And he's like, "Yes, yes, it's weird." And then we started talking about my dad's care. And then I said, "Well, we're coming on Friday." My dad's like, "Don't come. It's okay. I'm going to be fine." I'm like, "We're coming, you know?"
Yeah.
And so when we came that first night, then we saw my dad, how ill he was, but we also had to meet up with the family, who had tons of questions, and well, his wife was just like quiet. So, and my dad, we didn't really see each other at the same time, because, you have to take turns seeing each other. So we would take turns and go meet in the family room. So that
Right.
was basically how our life was every time we went. We'd visit my dad, we'd go meet in the family room, or we'd go for a meal. And so we were slowly trying to get to know each other. And they're like, "So when were you guys born? Like, when did your
Yeah.
parents get divorced?" Like, everyone was trying to put the pieces together. Like, how
So
long have you known? Like, all those things started happening, you know?
okay, so this is so incredible because I could imagine there being shock being part of this, right?
Yes.
And because this is simultaneous with your dad's health declining, and that's
Right.
obvious to you. Even if he's being upbeat about it, it's obvious to you. His health is declining. Here's this whole new family. So now, how does joy come into the picture here? Because this is such an amazing story that you just think would be full of could just really alarm a certain kind of person, but for you this was a healing event.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, it doesn't, because it didn't feel like the worst thing I'd ever been through, I suppose. You know?
Hey,
I
there's
think that was part of it. I was like, "I got this," like, I don't know. It just didn't feel like I was just like, "Okay, let me just meet it where it goes. Whatever I'm feeling, I'm gonna feel the feels," right? I
okay.
just was like, "Okay, I have to just go with this. What else can I do?" There was nothing really to be done, you know? I was like, "We'll see them. It'll be weird, but we have to go." And so with my dad, yeah, I kept thinking he's gonna get better. I kept thinking the nurses, and they would say, "Oh, well, this is improving. This is improving. This is a challenge, but this is improving." And
Okay.
so, that's what I kept telling myself, like, "This is going to be fine. Like, he'll be okay, right?" Like, he's like, "Oh, I'm fine. I'll just have to do this and this, and then it'll be fine." Like, and so I believed it, and I wanted to believe it. And I thought, now, we're finally all together. We all know each other. This is going to be good, right? Like, we'll have a good old time. And I actually, so I was texting my new family. I would be like, "Oh, Dad's really sick, so we should maybe tell his sister, because I'd want to know if it's my brother, right?" So I said, "Mark, go get that information." So he would do that, and then he'd like get messages back from me. So meanwhile, I was talking to my dad's family, and that was also nice, because they're like, "Where have you been?" kind of thing, which was
Where
nice, because they were sort of like, I had felt like it was no one looking for us or for me,
okay.
on my
Yeah.
dad's side, like, all this time had passed, but no one. I was like, no one wanted to reach out to us, even though I'd been trying to find information.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so I had that. I was talking to my aunt, I was talking to my cousins, I was talking to and they were a lot closer than I thought, or like nearby, or, sending messages. And it was like really nice. That was that joy of like finding your family that you felt like wasn't looking for you at all, right? Oh
Yeah.
yeah. And meanwhile, I had the support of my mom's family, which was always nice, but it had gotten like better too. Like, I had been talking to them more, because they also liked my dad,
Yeah.
right? So, and they're still in Montreal. So I had all those like supports I guess it felt like, and like people kind of, we were all sort of rallying for him to get better into this story that was so bizarre that it actually could work out, that maybe
Right.
this will be our story, right?
Right.
Remember that thing that happened last summer, like,
Yeah.
right?
So that's amazing, right? Because things that often people take for granted, just knowing who family is or being able to rally the troops and have that support. For you, this was really discovering those people for the first
Hmm.
time, other than your immediate siblings, right? So it
Right.
felt like this incredible the secret could be set down, set aside. The real people could emerge, and you're in a situation where you're all wanting to work together. Okay, so now that makes sense to me. Then your dad dies in the middle of all this, right? He
Right.
doesn't get better. Okay,
So,
so let's
and
talk about
I know this sounds, kind of weird, but we kind of joked about like, well, he is going to do anything to get out of this right now because this is really tough to answer to all of this, like this is a lot. I'm like, Dad he had died to get out of answering all these questions, in the last
right.
3 weeks
Good.
or a month, he couldn't even really speak, right? So I was like, wow, he really goes to far lengths to not be able to talk about this or answer because I'm pretty sure
An escape
his
artist
family was,
right, from this.
yeah, I was like, wow, like, Dad, you're really going far, like, to do this, like,
Oh,
just to get out of it right now, because
right.
there's no way you're getting out of this by the end time of, you've got some questions to answer,
Yeah, yeah.
and not easy ones. Like, he did say one thing, I remember he said, you
It's
know,
amazing.
I didn't want to hurt anyone, which is why I didn't say anything. But he didn't elaborate on that. He's just like, I didn't want to hurt anyone. My intention was not to hurt anyone.
Okay.
And that's why I didn't say anything about both of you to each other.
Yeah.
But I mean, my parents had been divorced. It wouldn't have hurt us. I wouldn't have felt bad. My brother just commented on the fact that we unfortunately we had lost all those years, like all those birthdays, all those like things that we could have as siblings kind of like been through together, and now we're, all grown up, right?
Yeah.
And we had lost all those years, and he just remarked on that, and I was like, yeah, that was like a big deal. Although, I couldn't celebrate holidays anyway, so I'd be
Yeah.
like, sorry, I don't celebrate birthdays. So, um, yeah, it was
Well,
something,
that's the farthest that he could go, really. What your dad could go really was to say, I didn't want to hurt anybody, and the most you were able to really to
Mhm.
to to glean from him, or to.
Yeah,
Okay, which really leaves the family in a way then to create your. I mean, now this is all time when you are discovering one another's story. You're part of one another's story. You're building one another's story without his immediate presence. Now he's part of
right.
that story, right? But he's not there. You'll never know all those other pieces then.
It's true. Well, I remember Jack Wang. He had
Yeah.
said to me,
For
because
the
we went
great
to
guy.
Humber School for Writers together, and he said to me, like years later, that you have enough for fiction as you do for like nonfiction
Yeah,
with your
of course.
father. And it made me kind of frame things a bit differently because I was like, yeah, it's my story to tell. So
Yeah,
I can make up some things just like he's probably made up some things. And he did,
and
you
he
know,
did.
he did. So, I mean, I think that really makes for good writing, right? The not knowing and
Yeah,
figuring out what makes sense to you, but also the narratives, I guess we have to tell ourselves to
yeah,
kind of like go on, or kind of live your life, whatever that life is, and
yeah.
I've done it for myself. So, why not my father, right?
Mhm,
An
mhm.
immigrant coming from, China and then going to the States, coming to Canada, made a new life, wanted a new life. And he did. He had a new life, right?
Mhm.
So I think in a different way than my mom did, from Nova Scotia to coming to, at least within the same country. And I think together, like they happened to meet, like what are the chances? She's from a tiny little town in New Waterford. They met
Yeah,
in Toronto, moved to Montreal,
mhm.
and so I just feel like part of my story is also telling part of their story
Yeah,
of what I can,
exactly.
and there was a lot of grief and sadness there too, but there was also like, I could see joy. And my dad always, talked well of my mom pretty much for the most part.
Okay, that's interesting.
I think there was a real love there at some point. And so for me, I try to like remember that that's what made us.
Place. Yeah. So in a moment, I'm going to ask you to do a reading for us. So you've got, but I just want to pause for a moment here and say that, when I hear your story, it's really remarkable because I felt like I really came to know my dad and connect with my dad in the 4 days before he died. That was the time that this sort of, kind of disappearing dad, he was just, for reasons that were complicated in our upbringing, he was just not around, and we were basically kind of kept from him. And so we really didn't have any sense of connection to him, or very loose sense of connection to that side of the family. And then it was this remarkable thing of, I was living in the States, and he was sick, and I had no idea how sick. And I basically had a dream. I had a dream. And in the dream, I'm talking to him on the phone, and I realized, I woke up like out of this dream. I thought, I have to go home. I have to go home. It was like, blizzards and, snowstorms, shut down the whole Northeast. It was a big epic journey to get back to see him. And then I saw him, and it was so clear that he was dying, and the doctors hadn't told him that he was dying. It was one of those classic kind of things where everybody knew that this was really a problem, but nobody really kind of talked openly about it. And and I just stayed with him, and in those 4 days, and he wasn't a big talker, in those 4 days, that I couldn't believe it, that in my life that healed like 39 years of not knowing. I didn't even think that would be possible, that you could have that. And not because we were talking up a storm, right? Or not because I was going to get any of my questions answered, or not because he's going to come, he's not going to say, oh, I love you, and you were, such a great dog. Like, I'm never going to hear those things, right? But somehow having access to him, I remember thinking, Tamara, it was like this thing like, okay, he's sick, he's in the bed, he can't go anywhere. Like, he's going to stay here, and he has to just receive all this, like this love and care from other people. And I think that was actually really hard for him. I think that was really, in a way, kind of the spiritual work that he had to do at the end of his life, was just receive. And I think, receiving was hard for him. He wasn't accustomed to receiving. He was, kind of accustomed to working and doing and making things possible for other people. And it was just extraordinary, that kind of time with someone, and watching the death, being around someone that you're related to, who's your father, seeing that person go through, accept what's happening to him. I mean, I got to be the lucky person to tell him, what the diagnosis was, and and he just sort of knew that, yeah, okay, this is it. Everything was like drawing on all his strength to die at that point. But I think that was this incredible thing. I couldn't believe that I could feel healed in a certain way, and at the same time, the grieving from that just kind of broke me wide open. It made me question everything I'd ever understood, or everything I'd been taught. I just stopped at my tracks and thought, yeah, okay, people who go through these kinds of experiences, this is pretty profound, and we don't really know about it because we don't talk about these things commonly, or very often, or maybe very openly. And I feel like, you're somebody who can write about this. I think there are people on this call tonight who can write about it. I feel the need to write about it. So
It's tough.
I would ask you to read some of your writing. Please
Okay,
do that.
no, I would love to.
Go into the writing exercise.
So I'm going to read from the Fiddleheads BIPOC Solidarities.
Beautiful. Thank you.
My editor was Roan McCandless, who's awesome, by the way. So if you ever get a chance to read her writing, she's awesome. So that was really nice. And actually, kudos to her. So I was going through the edits just before my dad was like very ill and dying. And so I said to her, I can't, I'm on my way to Montreal, like I have to go. And I was wondering if you could just, I trust you, I accept everything, all the edits that you're doing.
Yeah.
So just please go ahead and do these edits for me, just because I'm having to go. And she was like, of course, and did it. And it was nice, and it ended up nicely. It was,
that's beautiful.
when you can trust someone with that, right? So that's great. So I'm just going to read from Lessons. And how Lessons came to be was basically at a class with Ayelet Zabari, me trying out nonfiction. And it took me about 8 years. And I'm not saying that that's the same for everyone, but I think for me to kind of learn my lesson, I actually needed to kind of go through a lot of things before I got to that piece. And so that's kind of how that piece came about. It was getting the courage to write about it, and then also to follow through on my own Jungian therapy and figure out things and be able to be open about writing it, because that piece almost didn't happen because I was writing fiction. So just
okay.
Lessons. 1, 2, buckle my shoe. When Miss Steiner took out the wooden shoe with its demonic laces, I'd hide under the beige school desk with the dust bunnies and orange plastic chairs with legs that scraped like nails on a chalkboard. I didn't know how to tie my shoelaces. My best friend Gisela, my protector, did it for me. I tried to learn, but it wouldn't stick in my brain. Miss Steiner listed this lack on my report card as unsatisfactory. They cared if you couldn't tie your shoelaces, sure, but nitrate-laced hot dogs for lunch was all hunky-dory with them. The teacher told Ma that I had the whole class singing, "We are Jehovah's Witnesses," which I had memorized, so I guess I could do some stuff all right. At the Kingdom Hall, we learned about Armageddon and Satan and what happens to those who do not follow God. Lying was forbidden since Jehovah sees all, but I could pray to him when being tested. Ma used to read listening to the great teacher to make us good little Christians, but it didn't always work. When Miss Steiner said that it was okay for me to eat pumpkin seeds at Halloween, I believed her. Ma punished me for that, one of the many times I failed her and God's rules for me. It took years for me to learn to tie my shoes, and when my father found out, he taught me in the apartment laundromat. He was fun in my earliest memories. I know now that I am a visual learner and Velcro sneakers didn't become a thing until the 80s. Children seem to be good at hiding what is not ready to be seen. 3, 4, knock at the door. Why do Jehovah's Witness girls wear hooker boots? Crystal shockingly tells me what a man said to her that morning on the street, inches away from the Kingdom Hall. I met her at a party when I was 16, and she's been one of my best friends since. Wherever we were, every Saturday morning, we were knocking on doors with the watchtower and awake, preaching the kingdom message. We ingested a steady diet of, oh, by the way, we don't believe in hellfire, so that's cool. But everyone wicked dies in Armageddon except for those doing God's will. That's all. First, Jehovah told Jesus, and then Jesus told the elders and the ministerial servants, who are male shepherds in our congregations, chosen by the Holy Spirit and the governing body of Jehovah's Witnesses, who are all male, blessed, and living in a volunteer commune supported by voluntary donations from the flock. Long live the patriarchy. On Saturday mornings, I still feel like I need to be somewhere, and it's been 8 years now. I wanted to be one of God's best students. I needed some dad, even if he was an invisible one. Who knew they were both such perfectionists? If I had been born around the 1930s during those bombastic preaching days, I would have put on one of those placards that read, "Religion is a snare and a racket." Wearing my sensible shoes, I'd lug around that 21-pound phonograph so you too could hear the good news of God. I've sometimes wondered that if some leader told me to drink the Kool-Aid, I would have done it too, if that's what I thought God wanted me to do. Thank you.
Beautiful. Okay, are you ready to make space for the writing exercise? Then I feel like afterwards we can come back and talk about this piece, but are you okay with that? We go
Sure,
straight
of
into
course.
it? All right, let's do that. I'm gonna find my, whoops, PowerPoint, and let's screen share. Beautiful. Okay, so I'll just set this up a bit. This is the opening slide. So when this is all still under recording, so after our session is finished and the video will be put up on the Awakening Spirituality website, you'll have a chance to revisit this writing exercise. And this is Tamara's website and her email. Are you good with people emailing you and contacting?
Of course.
Okay.
Yeah, please do.
Good. And you can always find me at that email address as well. Grief, when it comes, is nothing like we expect it to be. So can joy be a gift of the grieving process? Okay, Tamara, over to you.
Okay. So, as a writer of mixed ancestry, I have questions about my ancestors. My mother had passed, and my father died last year after a short illness in the hospital. So, as was mentioned, there are things my parents couldn't give me in life, but they did in death. I got to meet new siblings. We reconnected with my dad's side of the family, our cousins, our aunts, his history, more of our history, my questions answered. So, with this grief, there was this gift that he couldn't give me until then. And then there was all this joy. And at the time, I could only take notes. And I started drawing again. I drew my father. I drew my new siblings. I prayed to God, just like in the movies. I asked my notebook questions, wrote down what the doctors said. I let days pass with no entries. I let myself remember. With my dad, I remember talking gibberish, and there was a lot of gibberish. Not sure if he heard me. I remember he laughed when I talked about dyeing my hair and him dyeing his hair. He couldn't talk at that point, and yet he laughed, and it made me so happy.
So talk to us about this piece.
Yeah, so that's just a picture of him in the final room that he was in before he passed. And yeah, he would listen to the radio, and then all the machines, are doing their beep beeping thing. And there was the gowns and things. We always had to gown up and go in. So there was kind of this process, of getting ready. So I would always take a deep sort of breath before I came into you're just like, okay, let's go, do the thing. And then yeah, I drew my sister and brother and I on one side, and then my other siblings on the other side, and I kind of like had no faces because sometimes there was like it's colors and not grief, I guess. I don't know if there's another way to explain that, but because I wasn't really writing, it was really hard to do a picture of like what sadness or kind of grief or worry looks like. And so I just kind of painted, so used some watercolors to kind of like express that without actually, showing the expressions.
Yeah.
And my father's there, like not knowing what's happening. His eyes are closed.
Well, and even the colors that you use in this, right? We can feel that, the shift, the waning of the life force.
Right.
In this piece.
Yeah, so this was done as part of a prompt from the Believers, and I really recommend. They do a lot of workshops, but also SAW does that now, Sequential Artist Workshop. And so I don't remember all the prompts, but I just do remember they were talking about ancestors, and then they asked us to kind of like to imagine if we couldn't actually think of like our ancestor, if we didn't know them, like what it was like, I think, to be in conversation sort of with them, and what questions or what kind of advice would we want them to offer us. And so this kind of came out of it. But I did tell Susan earlier that I had a lot of resistance because I didn't know at the time what my grandfather looked like. Although I'd asked for pictures, like no one had anything. And so just imagining that he looked like my dad, so I just based the picture off my father. And I only had to do 4 panels, so I was going to be like, I'm not going to do this. I'll watch what everyone else does. But I remember thinking, let me try it because something always good came out of trying. And that resistance always turns into like there's obviously something there when you have a bit of a resistance. So I decided to write the story that I knew. And how true that was or not true, I didn't know, but this was the story I knew. So my grandfather came from China to the US and ran 2 restaurants. I never met or saw a picture of him, so I made him based off my dad. And I wrote, I wonder what keeps me going sometimes. I'd like to think it's my elders speaking to me. And so he says, don't give up even when it's hard. Because I imagine as an immigrant, it's not easy. And then how their love is there even if they are no longer on the earth. And then there's like love there. And then pss, 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 pss. Just as a side note, I did have kind of like an experience when I first went back to writing. At school, I had heard whispering, and it was like the week of my birthday and when I had first started back to writing. So I didn't know if that was connected, but I was kind of frightened to think that it might be my ancestors or someone talking to me. So, but either way, there's that love.
So
And then
very
I think that they visit me in my dreams and hold me. So that feeling of like comfort and being held, that, that you're not alone, that there's generations before you that came that still kind of are trying to guide you, whatever those signs look like to you, whether they're physical or spiritual. I still kind of, even though I'm not really religious anymore, I still feel myself as a spiritual person.
Yeah. And in here we see that how your ancestor had that connection, that really strong connection.
So the question is, these are the prompts sort of. So when has grieving also brought you joy? Was there something you thought you would never recover from, and yet there was joy that came to you? And, this is really broad. So it could be imaginary or it could be real, but it could be the end of one thing that's the start of something else. When living a job, for example, a city, a relationship, but it's just a starting of a new. There's joy, there's also being tentative about these new things. But I feel like even with grief, um, again, with my mother's death, I think if she didn't die, maybe I would have never left my religion. I also think about that. And I think, and I was able to grieve her properly. I don't think I would have been able to grieve her in the same way. And when my dad did die, it was more real grieving, I have to say. And I hadn't felt that before, which felt strange, but also good because you realize you're capable, or I realized I was capable of grief also, but also to have joy in that moment.
Incredible. Okay, so let's give people, let's see, we're running a little bit behind tonight, but we'll have a few minutes to talk. So let's give people 8 minutes. I'll watch the timer. And 8 minutes, write, draw, whatever comes to you, whatever bubbles to the surface. Tamara, do you want to add anything?
For sure, yeah, nothing's wasted. Even if it's like some kind of a dream. I had a crazy dream where I was with Lady Gaga and I said, no one cares that my father died. And Lady Gaga was there like, whatever. And even though someone pointed out to me, she's actually very empathetic. And there was a Yelp review, a bathtub. So I think nothing is out of like untowards, include whatever comes to your mind, whether again, you're writing or drawing, and just don't try to judge it. I try not to be too precious with these first, lines. It's usually the truest forms come to the surface for me. So just go with that and don't be shy. And if you have nothing, that is fine too. If you just want to think, that's good too.
Okay. Or draw or sketch and whatever comes. And don't censor, just go for it.
Exactly.
Okay. We'll have some quiet time. We'll meet you all in 8 minutes. 3 minutes. One minute. Okay, we're ready to gather. Tamara, if you would just talk for a moment, just a moment's worth about the resources here, and then we'll open up for people to talk, just things that people might want to go to. Can you unmute? Okay.
Sorry, my bad. I muted myself and then I cannot unmute myself.
That's because you behave. You behave really well. So you follow the rules. Okay. So there are four or five things. Just real quick, if you want to point out.
Yeah, so if you are interested in finding out more resources, there's tons at Sequential Artist Workshop. That's where I took my comic certificate program, and really great community there as well. Very encouraging. I never for once felt like I didn't belong there, which was really nice as a sort of, I don't want to say born again, but a newly into my drawing again. The Believer Comics has a ton of like workshops as well, which was really great. Drawing Your Ancestors was the one that we drew upon for the example, and that was really good. And so even if you want to go through it, you can do the YouTube exercise and do it yourself. It's kind of fun.
It's great.
And the offing is, it shows some narrative sort of like comics. And then Sarah Miner is a really good like artist and writer that has really a lot of like very inspiring pieces. So I really recommend her, highly recommend.
Okay, beautiful. Thank you. Thank you for watching. We'll see you next month. And now we're going to stop the recording, stop share, and go to open session for Q&A. I realize that it is on the hour, so many people might need to leave, and we just are grateful for the time that you spent with us tonight. Those of you who would like to stay around for a little while, we're here to take your questions. If you want to read an excerpt, wherever this took you, we'll spend some time. So